Welcome to Wealth Made Simple with Shaz, where you'll learn how to master your money through business, property, and tax-saving strategies. Your host has collectively helped his clients make tens of millions of pounds in additional profits through these strategic approaches to business. Introducing Shaz Nawaz, an award-winning chartered accountant, property tax expert, entrepreneur, and property investor.
This week on Wealth Made Simple, we're going to discuss lease option agreements.
Interesting.
Well, they themselves, I personally don't find them interesting, but there are some interesting factors about them. And I think that recently in the King's speech, he discussed potential changes to lease option agreements, which we're going to cover on today, and it will probably take us down a number of different rabbit holes. So with that in mind, what is a lease option agreement?
Well, let's talk about what a lease is first.
Okay, let's talk about what a lease is first.
Okay, so in very simple terms, a lease is an arrangement between a lessor and a lessee where one party agrees to lease or rent a property from somebody who owns it for a particular period of time. So it's a bit like a short-hold tenancy that a tenant has with a landlord, but it's a longer term and it's more sophisticated. So an AST is a couple to 3 pages long, depending on which form you use.
Yeah.
But as in the form of the AST, a lease, I've seen a 10-page lease and I've seen a 150-page lease. So
it's a lot covered in 150 pages.
Oh, yes, yeah. A lot. And then, I mean, those bigger ones usually are when you've got corporate clients involved, like some of the really big businesses, because they want everything spelled out, laid out properly, to leave less room for misunderstanding and confusion. And generally in a lease agreement, you've got obviously the terms, who's paying what, when, how the whole thing works, the tenure, how long it's going to be for, break options, rent reviews, arbitration, and lots more. So it takes a while to agree a lease because there's back and forth in terms of the lessor and the lessee, and both are usually represented by a solicitor. So it's a cumbersome exercise because it always takes longer than it should do, in my view.
And anything to do with property and the legalities and the legal process just takes longer than it should do.
Yeah, because usually what you'll find, and I'm not saying it's wrong, by the way, but solicitors are arguing over certain wording, and both parties have a particular view on it, and sometimes I've seen that they're arguing over a clause and it takes like 2 months.
Yeah,
it's back and forth, and could have just been dealt with very simply on a Zoom or Teams call or a face-to-face meeting. And at the end, usually that happens, by the way. But why didn't we do this 2 months ago?
Well, I mean, as an example, the last property I bought, there was a conversation that was had between the solicitors, and I say conversation, it was a little more than conversation, you understand, but It was about rights of access, and it went back and forth for about 2.5, 3 months, and in the end, the seller's solicitors came back to us and said, or my solicitors went back to the seller's solicitor and said, if you'd have done what I'd have asked you to begin with, and you complained you couldn't do it because it took too long, if you'd have just done it in the first instance, would have been done by now.
Yeah.
And their response was, oh yeah, that's a very good point. You're not backing down, are you? And I was like, no, I'm protecting my client.
That's their job.
And that's my job. And they were like, okay. So we'll agree that we'll do it your way. And it's like, why did it take 3 months for you to agree to do it that way? Crazy.
It is, isn't it?
But yeah, in the end, it was a phone call that solved it.
Always does, doesn't it?
And you just think 3 months back and forth, I'm paying for that. And one phone call, sorted.
Everything, any type of, let's call it conflict,
Yep.
where you've got two conflicting views, anywhere from two parties not agreeing to, let's say, the most serious one being war, where two countries are at war.
Yeah.
At the end, Kieran, they have to, in a roundabout way, through mediation, arbitration, call it what you like, sit down, okay,
And talk.
Yeah. You think, why didn't you do that right at the start?
Yeah. Yeah, so true.
Yeah. But moving on then to a lease agreement for tenants,
Yep.
or an owner of a lease, basically, is where somebody has a property and they are selling the leasehold. So when you're buying property, you can buy the freehold and the leasehold.
Yep.
You buy the freehold, you actually own the property and
the land it's on.
yeah, and you're usually the legal and beneficial owner. When you have a lease arrangement in place, the freehold always belongs to the person who owns it, okay, and the lessee has right over that property over a certain number of years. And usually, not always, you'll see it as 99 years, 125 years, or 999 years. They're the common ones that you see,
Yeah.
but there can be different periods, by the way. And then in that, you've got all the things that I talked about. But on top of that, you've got the ground rent being paid, maintenance and service charges, rights and responsibilities, which obviously go into every single lease, lease extensions, and if there can be a freehold purchase, because you mentioned the word leasehold option.
Option, yeah.
So it can be purchased. So there's a lot that goes in that particular type of document, and as you can appreciate, if it's those are called long-term leases. So if it's something for 99 years, it needs to be detailed.
Yeah, because, I mean, you don't want to get, 25 years in and pass it on to your children, for example, as part of their inheritance, and then realise that you didn't put in something you should have put in, or that you can't pass it on to your children because it's not part of the lease
Or you're
agreement.
selling it on, because you sometimes use a property on for sale and it says leasehold and it's got 50 years remaining. Whoever's buying it, they're listed, then you'll ask all those questions, okay, on the lease. So it gets very complicated. And if you miss something out and they've picked it up and it can't be changed, or the lessor isn't able to change it, it's again a long, drawn-out process. With the word option in it, what that usually means is the lessee has an opportunity to purchase the property at some point in the future. And generally speaking, how that works is somebody wants to buy a property and says, I can't afford to buy it right now. Let's do a lease purchase option, which basically is I'll lease it for 5 years, and in that period at any point, I can buy the property from you. So that gives them that particular security that they're taking over the property, they're looking after it, they're maintaining it, they might be renting it out to a third-party tenant, but in that period, they can then buy that property, but they can't buy it right now because they haven't got the funding or something else is going on where they can't do the transaction.
And I mean, and that sort of option agreement is great for fledgling property investors, because it means you can be using the cash flow from the rental to save up the deposit, so that you can start your property investment business.
Absolutely. And where you see this being used quite often, not always, is where somebody, let's say a person owns a property, let's call them a landlord, just keep it really simple, and they've not had much luck because they've had void periods, or the previous person looking after it hasn't really managed it well, and they're not very happy with it. So, and they want guaranteed rent. So let's say you come along and say, I'll do a 5-year lease purchase option. I'll pay you a fixed rent every month. Let's just say it's £1,000, and I'll guarantee to pay you that over the next 5 years every single month. and then they turn it into an HMO
Yep.
and rent it by room as opposed to by per property. So they're making a nice margin. And let's say it's a 4-bedroom property, and so they've got
4 rooms at, say,
let's keep it simple,
£700.
yeah. Sometimes people use the front room and the living room depending on the size, but we'll keep it really simple. 4-bedroom, let's say it's got 4 separate tenants, and they're charging, let's say, £400.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Even as little as £400.
Just keep it really simple. So they're making £1,600, paying £1,000. They've got £600 margin. Usually the numbers can be
A lot bigger.
bigger depending on the area that they're in.
Yeah. And I mean, you calculate that up over a period of 5 years for the sake of the lease, £600 profit a month over 5 years is what? 7,200 a year?
Yep.
Which is 3,600. 36,000 over 5 years.
Yes.
That's your deposit right there.
There you go.
Suddenly, at the end of that 5 years, I mean, as soon as you've hit that
You
threshold,
might have some of the costs involved.
yeah, obviously,
responsible.
it's never that simple.
Exactly, but the whole, even if it's 25,000 left over, £20,000 left over, and the margins aren't usually that tight.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they are bigger. You've got a deposit, unless you obviously need that money personally to survive. So you might have 3, 4, 5, 6 lease options. So if you've got cash,
cash
there
flow
for your own personal use plus savings, and you can then work towards buying the property.
Yeah.
Or buying a property. Yeah.
So that's kind of an overview of leases and leasehold and freehold and the difference between the two and how you've got to pay different amounts. Because in a lot of cases for a lot of flats, there are a lot of flats are leasehold in this country.
Yeah, because what happens is somebody buys a property, let's say it's a commercial property, and they convert it into 20 flats.
Yep.
And then they're saying, okay, now we need to do a title split. Well, you do a title split by creating leases.
Yep.
And they then sell on those leases to the people who want to occupy those properties, generally speaking. And then they've got a certain tenure, 99 years or whatever the period might be. And they can obviously, that property pretty much is theirs for 99 years.
Yep.
And then you're back to renewal. And obviously those terms would also be part of the lease agreement. Where things get interesting and have been, and there have been some changes to this, is the ground rent and also the maintenance and service charges.
Yeah.
Because some people were abusing those rules, and the tenants were getting stung with high service charges or maintenance charges that they weren't expecting. And quite often what you find is when there's that arrangement in place, people always don't read the detail and
Devil
aren't
is in the
fully
detail.
aware of the service charges and how they can fluctuate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I say, the devil is in the detail. It will have all been agreed to, whether or not they intentionally agreed it or unintentionally agreed it. Those sorts of landlords do, well, you signed the document, so I'm entitled to ground rent, service charge, etc., etc., etc.
Somebody's built 15 houses, and let's say the road isn't adopted, and we don't want to get too technical on this, okay? But it's a private road, and therefore, all of the areas which don't form part of each property, right, is a responsibility of the freeholder, and the freeholder will be charging tenants for maintaining the road, okay, and any of the green space. There's car parks or a car park looking after that, okay. There could be security cameras, there could be certain additional lighting. All of those things add up, and then you've got weeds to be maintained, and they just
communal bins.
Yeah, that's right. And then on top of that, they've got somebody who manages that particular area, so there's a fee for them as well. So all that gets set up, divided by the number of occupants, and you're paying the funds. And then every year they have a meeting, but they go through those numbers and say, this is what you're paying. And then you've got some bigger expenditure, so they have a sinking fund as well for something major, like the road needs to be fixed or tarmacked or re-tarmacked, that type
Yeah.
of stuff. So they didn't have that in place. So it can get very, very costly.
Yeah, and we're not like you say, there is that service charge that needs to be there because it can get, like you say, very, very costly. But sometimes it gets overcharged, and not in all cases, not in every case. But it's important to be aware that both options of the spectrum
The management
exist.
cost usually is where it can
varies.
be quite extortionate.
Yeah.
Not always, but it can be, and that's where people get upset.
Yeah.
Because the cost is the cost.
And I think most people are generally decent people, and they can appreciate that, if you want a nice road to drive down into, if you want, your parking space kept free of weeds, you want, there to be lighting, there to be security, there is a cost involved in that intrinsically.
And and if there's kind of fly tipping taking place and there's overgrown shrubs and weeds and that kind of stuff, that annoys people. So they want it cleaned more regularly and more regularly. Well, you're gonna have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I think most people,
you can't ask the council to come and do it because this is a private road in a private area, so you've got to fund it as opposed to the council sending out their people to tidy up.
Yeah. So that's a brief overview of lease options and leasehold. So now we're going to get into the proposed potential changes that might be coming. And I know I've been very ambiguous there, but none of this is law. None of this has changed yet. These are just the notes that came out of the King's speech from the 7th of November about all of this. So you'll forgive me if I read it from the sheet, because I want to get it right and I don't want to misinform anyone. So,
and are you going to do it in the voice of the king?
I am absolutely not. I would not insult him in that way. But the whole purpose of all of these changes is to look at fairness within the housing market and making sure that everyone gets the right treatment for what they're doing,
and addressing those punitive charges.
Yeah. So the changes are aiming at improving homeownership for the millions of leaseholders in England and Wales, making it easier for leaseholders to extend their lease or buy their freehold and take management of their building.
They make it sound so good, don't they?
I know they. There's a
This
lot.
will be
There's a lot.
transformational.
Yeah, there's a
Everybody
lot
will
of
own a
complexity in there. This is building on the Grounds Rent Act from 2022, which
is
put,
what I was talking about earlier in terms of there's been changes.
Yeah. Which put what that did was it put an end to ground rents for new and long residential leasehold properties. So you weren't adding a markup on the markup on a markup.
Well, and also, what used to happen was people used to sell on those ground fees, and there were companies out there who would pay you 10, 15, 20. I think the highest multiplier I saw was 35. So
Wow.
if you've got, let's say, you're charging £500 ground rent per property, and you've got 20 properties, so £500 per property, okay? And 20, you got £10,000 times 35. You're making a lot of money. You're making £350,000 when you sell that on.
Yeah.
Now, not in all cases was it 35, but it could have been 10, 15, okay, 20.
But even so.
And even if it's 10 on 10,000 is 100 grand.
Yeah. Still a lot of
So
money.
They had to address that because people just couldn't afford to make those payments.
No, and yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of half the problem in the first place was.
And there were so many complaints as well that we're paying and we don't get the service we need, and we would have called somebody out and it takes them a week to respond to you and 3 weeks to fix it. And these are the things I was hearing from people. I've never had that particular arrangement in place. I've just never believed in it. Yeah, I've always thought it's more hassle than it's worth. But I know people who were doing quite well out of it. Just from the conversations that you have from people, this is how we set this arrangement up. And I don't think any of them were doing anything untoward, by the way. No. Just a particular arrangement. But as you know, it's only a handful who usually abuse the rules
And make it bad for
worse
everyone.
everybody else. So people think, oh, this guy or girl or person is charging ground rent. There must be that horrible monster that I read about in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Or heard about on TV or a podcast or radio or wherever.
Yeah, and then, like you say, a lot of the time that's simply not the case. It's just, the minority few.
It is. I mean, and I think it's like, let's just talk about two different businesses. First one, estate agents. Generally speaking, in the past, I've had a bad rep.
Yes.
Yet all the estate agents I've acted for and worked with, Kieran, I can say wholeheartedly, I have been some of the most ethical people I've come across. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they're all good, by the way, because but they're not all good in any industry.
No.
Secondly, landlords. Okay.
Landlords get a real bad rap.
And yet, as you know,
Greedy.
we work with a lot of landlords. And I'm yet to come across one who we've acted for, who's looking to cut corners.
Yeah.
Never. They always want to do a good job and to a good spec.
And they want to do right by their tenants.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you kind of ask people out there, especially some who may not have experience with landlords, their perception is based on what they've read, and those horror stories are based on a small percentage of the marketplace.
Yeah, no, it's always the way though, isn't it? In every industry.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was discussed in the speech was the empowerment of leaseholders. And so the idea being that they're going to potentially increase the standard lease extension term from 90 to 990 years. This is for both flats and houses, with ground rent reduced to nothing. This will ensure that leaseholders can enjoy long-term safeness, security, without the hassle or the expense of extending leases, because that's another thing, is the expense of extending a lease.
And the government think that's going to fix the problem.
Well,
Aren't they in for a surprise?
They're looking at removing the requirement for new leaseholders to have owned their house or flat for 2 years before they can benefit from these changes. So that means that leaseholders can exercise their right to the security of freehold ownership or a 990-year lease.
They're sticking plaster onto a bigger problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. And increasing the 25% non-residential limit, preventing leaseholders in buildings with a mixture of homes and other uses such as shops and offices and mixed-use properties from buying their freehold or taking over the management of their building, to allow leaseholders in buildings with up to 50% non-residential floor space to buy their freehold or use its management. So I guess that sounded very wordsy for what it is. And what that boils down to is, if I rent a flat or lease a flat above a block of shops and the shops take over more than 50% of the space, as it stands right now, it's the freehold owner that deals with the management, and I have no right to dispute that or argue it or change it. Whereas this proposal says that doesn't matter that I've got less than 50% of the overall land space, I get a say in how the grounds are managed.
Yeah, because usually they set up a management committee.
Yeah.
And some of the lessees form part of that management committee.
Yeah. So following on from that, making or selling a leasehold property quicker and easier by setting a maximum time and fee for the provision of information required to make a sale, such as building insurances, financial records, available to the leaseholder by their freeholder, or in a lot of cases the landlord. So it just makes that transparency of information a lot easier to get hold of. So and that for me is only a good thing.
Yep.
I don't see that being a bad thing. And transparency over the service charges. The service charges we were discussing earlier, it costs me this much to maintain the parking spaces, this much for the lights, this much for the CCTV, this much for... So it's asking landlords and freeholders to be transparent with what it is they're telling their tenants, their leaseholders,
Yeah, those common areas.
those common areas, and how much they actually cost, so that the leaseholders know they're getting a fair deal. And there's replacement of buildings insurance commissions for managing agents, landlords, and freeholders with transparent administration fees, stopping leaseholders from being charged exorbitant commissions on top of their already high premiums.
Yep.
Which will be really, really good for the clarity of, so people understand what they're paying. Extended access to redress schemes for leaseholders to challenge poor practice. Now, I think that could only be a good thing. It stops people from taking advantage of others, in my opinion. If you see poor practice or things that need to change, you can challenge it. And I think across the board, that can only be a good thing. We'll see how that comes into effect. And the scrapping the presumption for leaseholders to pay their freeholders' legal costs when challenging this poor practice. So currently, the way it works is if I'm the leaseholder and you're the freeholder, and I say you're challenging me, you're charging me over the odds, and you say no, and it ends up going to court, I've got to pay your court fees as it stands now.
Yes, right.
And they're talking about getting rid of that.
Well, the legal fees, yeah.
The legal side of it. And granting freehold homeowners on private and mixed tenure estates the same rights of redress as leaseholders. So by extending the equivalent rights to transparency over their estate charges, access to support via the redress schemes and the challenge charges, should any issues arise. And building on the legislation brought forward by the Building Safety Act of 2022, ensuring freeholders and developers are unable to escape their liabilities to fund building remediation work, protecting leaseholders by extending the measures in the Building Safety Act 2022 to ensure it operates as intended. Right, that's just a fancy way of saying, we're going to look after you and we're going to make sure things are right. You're going to get what you pay for.
Rightly so.
And and rightly so. I don't see that being a bad thing at all. Under the proposed reforms is the banning the creation of new leasehold houses. So that other than in exceptional circumstances, every new house in England and Wales will be freehold from the outset. You won't be able to there won't be any leasehold houses, which I can see as a double-edged sword, personally. I think if I can afford to buy the house, but it's an investment property for me, and somebody can't afford to buy it, but they can afford to lease it, it's, and we can come to some agreement. It swings and roundabouts. I understand what the potential ideal is and what it's trying to achieve, but like you said earlier, Band-Aid over a bigger problem. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but we'll wait and see.
Usually most of these things don't work, Kieran. That's what experience shows.
Yeah.
And it creates a bigger problem. The law of unintended consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. You start, well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yep.
That is how the phrase goes. So the Building Safety Act has delivered far-reaching protections for leaseholders against remediation costs and an ambitious enforcement regime to hold freeloaders and developers to account.
Freeloaders?
Freeloaders? I mean freeholders. Some might say that was a Freudian slip.
No comment.
So this is from a statistic on the government website. There are 752,000 households with children and 1.48 million over 65s who are leasehold homeowners.
Big number.
So, that is a huge number. You add them together, you get, just over 2 million people.
1 million, yeah.
Or 2.5 million, I think.
Well, over
Just
top of it, yeah.
approaching.
Yeah.
So, and this next point is leading straight into what I was just saying about, if I can afford to buy, but a potentially leaseholder cannot. The aim is to reform the housing market. 49% of leaseholders are first-time buyers because they can't afford to purchase freehold straight off the bat, and 28% of leaseholders are under 35. The land registry data says that 22% of residential property transactions in 2019 were leasehold. That's around 238,000 transactions in total across the country. And almost all flats are sold on a leasehold basis in general, which I think we touched on a bit earlier about how it affects differently for renting out a house or leasing out a house versus flats. So that's all on that page. Like I said earlier, I am going from the notes because I want to get this right.
It's important, yeah.
Don't want to make a muck up of these. So the idea is to make it significantly cheaper for leaseholders to extend their leases. So a first-time buyer in a £250,000 leasehold flat with a 76 years left on their lease would currently have to pay around £16,000 to extend the lease, plus around £10,000 to cover their costs and the freeholders' costs.
It's crippling, isn't it?
Yeah. If you couldn't afford to buy it freehold, what makes anyone think you've got £26,000 spare to extend a lease? If I had £26,000 to spare,
you'd use it as a deposit to buy a house.
I'd use it as a deposit to buy freehold. So it's just not sustainable. It's not acceptable in a lot of cases because it's just so difficult. Under the new proposal, they'll only pay around £9,000 plus their own legal costs for a 990-year extension. I mean, that's a significant saving from 26 grand down to 9 plus their legal fees, which I think can only be a good thing. The thriving private rented sector is a vital part of the housing market, and I think the government agrees with that. And this will provide flexibility for those who want it, and a secure stepping stone towards home ownership for renters who are leasing rather than just purely renting to get onto the housing ladder in the event. And I mean, I think everyone should be able to get themselves into a position where they can own their own home.
So up until now, there's nothing from the government about why they've missed the target of building new homes year on year.
Yeah. And yeah.
That's the problem.
It is. And also the cost of living crisis, the inflationary increases, the interest rate increases, all of these things have a direct impact on housing. And landlords get labeled, as we discussed earlier, as money grabbing, evil, blah 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 blah. It's always the landlord's problem. But fundamentally, we live in a capitalist society. Whether you like it or not, that's the reality. And as a business owner, because that's what being a landlord is, it's a business. It's just like owning a shop. Don't think of it any differently. Mm-hmm. And I challenge anyone to prove me wrong on this. But if it costs me more money to get a loaf of bread to my shop, the cost of bread is going to go up.
We've seen that. See, when Section 24 was introduced,
I
was saying this means an increase in rent.
Of course it does.
And other punitive measures have been introduced, including the 3% SDLT on second or additional
homes. Yeah.
What do you think's happening to the cost? It's being passed on, and you've seen rents increase over the last 10 years since the then Chancellor in 2014, 2015, George Osborne, started changing the rules.
Yep.
I think it was 2013, in fact, when he kind of introduced the first kind of change. And it makes the whole thing unaffordable now, doesn't it, for a lot of people?
Yeah.
They can't afford to pay their rent. And landlords get blamed for it. It's not the landlord, it's the government.
Yeah, absolutely
let's
is.
be clear on
Let's be very, very clear on that.
Yeah. They've forced this into the marketplace, whether it's intended, unintended, don't want to go into that. But they've created this situation, okay, and then you take responsibility for it. And they need to build more homes, and they need to build more council-owned homes.
And more affordable homes.
Yeah, and that works. But they use that word a lot, Kieran.
Yeah.
Okay? But what's affordable?
What's affordable?
Yeah.
Yeah. Define an affordable home for me. Because the average UK income is between £25,000 and £30,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's £2,000 a month, give or take. £2,000 a month. Okay, so I need to save a deposit out of that. How much is the deposit? Average deposit, £25,000. Yeah, with fees and all the rest of it. So if I save £500 a month, I mean, I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm doing very, very well.
Yeah.
But
not the current climate anyway. But
if I save £500 a month, means I'm saving £6,000 a year.
It'll take 6 years.
Take me 6 years to get a deposit for a house. Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's bring it back down to earth and be more realistic here. Your rent is probably £800.
If you're lucky,
£900 in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I know one of my friends rents, and their rent's just been put up to £1,200 a month, and they live in a 2-bedroom flat in Peterborough.
A lot, isn't it?
£1,200 a month. Now, we've just established, the average income at £2,000. So okay, £1,200. Call it £1,000 of that. Call it half of it has gone on rent.
But it was interesting, though. Just to deviate a little bit. So I'm doing what you normally do.
No, Shaz, come back from the rabbit hole. Come back from the rabbit hole.
I can see you up there, Kieran. Come down. But the landlord in that particular situation, on that £1,200, is probably making £50 to £100 a month, if that.
Oh, if that.
If that.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not any better off.
No. And this,
how do I know? Because we act for loads of them.
Yeah. And you know the landlord personally for this particular one. Mm-hmm. Very large. You were there this morning.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't have a choice. The cost of the government get passed to the landlord, gets passed to the end user.
Yeah.
That's the way it always works. That's commercial, right through and through. But call it £1,000 rent. Okay, £1,000 rent. That's half your wages. Gas, electricity, water. In this economy, you're currently looking at at least £100 each, maybe even more, depending on how many people are in your family. But we'll call it £100 each, just because it's easy. So that's another £300. Okay. Car, fuel,
food.
So suddenly
clothing,
that £1,000 has become
phone bills.
Who can afford to save £500 to get a house in 6 years? Because tell you one thing for nothing, prices only go up. They rarely come down. So even if you're saving £300 a month, let's say you live a really frugal life and you manage to save out of your £2,000, you've got zero debt, you've got zero, you're paying your rent, you're paying your bills, you're covering your food and covering your fuel, and you work close to home, so you can walk to work a lot.
10 years is what it'll take you.
10 years.
And by that time, the prices have increased.
You'll
so
have need to double.
Deposit.
Yeah, prices will have doubled.
But you see what I mean? So, and this is why these
measures,
basically this direction of travel on this particular measure is helpful in some ways, but it doesn't go far enough to fix the real underlying problem, which is more housing.
That's the problem, isn't it? Fundamentally, rather than looking at the symptoms, you need to look at the cause. You know, if I'm, you know, ill, I don't expect a doctor to just address, oh, you've got a bit of lesion on your skin. We'll give you a cream for that. Okay, but what's causing it? Oh, that might need some pills. That might need some surgery, or that might need something else. But to just give me a topical cream because that's all the thing you can see, you need to understand the root cause. And I think that's something that is sometimes missed, or I say sometimes, a lot of the time missed. But that's so as part of the government's long-term plan, this reform, potential reform, is to support 11 million private tenants and 2.5 million landlords. That's the goal, is to support all those people. They aim to abolish no-fault evictions, increasing a tenant's security, but that will not but they won't commence the abolition of Section 21 until stronger possession grounds and a new court process is in place.
Mm-hmm. On evictions, yeah.
On evictions, yeah. But they also, on the flip side of that same thing, they want to strengthen the grounds for possession by landlords, adding new mandatory grounds for possession if landlords wish to sell the property, or for repeat serious rent arrears, as well as expanding grounds for when close family members wish to move into to a property, or if a tenant breaches their tenancy agreement or damages the property. Landlords will potentially be able to start evicting people in as little as 2 weeks. So, double-edged sword there. More security for tenants for no reason evictions. Mm-hmm. So you can't just, Section 21 someone. But at the same time, if you are in rent arrears, serious difficulty, or causing a problem, it makes it easier for landlords to get people out. Tenants who are persistently disruptive, for antisocial tenants, the bill seeks to halve the delay between landlord serving notice for antisocial mm-hmm. behaviour and eviction. I think that's a good thing. I think, if you break the law, if you're antisocial, then, and when I say antisocial, I mean antisocial from a law perspective, not from a I don't like people's perspective, because, there are some days I know I can be antisocial. I don't like people.
Yeah, but this causes a huge problem for landlords or the owners, because let's using the earlier example, when someone's got 10 properties and one person's causing a problem, the other 9 are going to the freeholder and saying, this person's problematic.
Yeah.
Can't sleep at night, don't feel safe, feel threatened, right? Aggressive behaviour, our children don't feel safe, so on and so forth. So they've got to do something about it, otherwise those 9 are going to get very, very, very upset very, very, very quickly.
Yes.
The landlord to do something ASAP. So this will help with that.
Help move things along, and also
in the right situation.
Yeah, in that exact scenario, you don't want it to take too long, because if I complain about you because you're a menace to the area,
you know me well now.
All too well. But there is a danger that when I as the landlord now serve notice on you, and legally I have to tell you why I'm serving notice on you, you then know that there are people around here that have complained about you. So now you start taking it out on them. And under current rulings, you can be there for a long time, exacting aggression
making
towards...
other people's lives a misery.
A misery, yeah. So I think
and most tenants are good as well, by the way.
Yeah, most tenants are most people in general are good people.
Yeah.
It's the minority. And this one I like, ending blanket bans on pets. I've got no problem with pets in the house, as long as there is a standard agreement. Your pet tears up the wall, you replace it, or you pay to get it fixed.
Some people say no dogs allowed, no cats or whatever. But
as long as everything is repaired, everything's cleaned, everything, I don't see the problem. But under the new proposals, tenants will have the right to request a pet which landlords cannot unreasonably refuse. Now you're going to get into the conversation of what's reasonable. So, Shaz, what's reasonable?
Well, I was talking about that this morning. Someone mentioned that particular word, and there's a room of 45, 50 people there.
Yeah.
And define reasonable. Everybody gives you a different answer, pretty much.
Really do.
And obviously, the law and statute and precedent helps us define what's reasonable, but it's very subjective. One person's reasonable is another person's very unreasonable.
Yeah. So you've got to be careful on that. And my concern with things like that is, whilst I personally don't have a problem with pets, I know a lot of landlords do. And when you word it ambiguously like that, and you use an ambiguous word like unreasonable or reasonable, it opens a lot for interpretation. And I think it should be very clear cut. Either you can or you can't. Either you say landlords can't deny tenants pets, provided that they agree to pay for damages, pay for cover the costs of.
What if somebody has a dinosaur as a pet? Will that be okay? Is that reasonable?
I think it is. I mean, I used to have a dinosaur as a pet.
I had two.
What sort of lizards?
One was a T-Rex. In fact, both were a T-Rex.
Both were T-Rexes.
Yeah. And yours?
I had.
You had a lizard, did you? Okay.
I had an iguana.
So did my son. He had two, in fact.
It was called Reginald.
Separate times. I don't remember what his were called, because I think he was very young. Yeah, I think he was 5 when he had his first one.
But lizards are basically dinosaurs, aren't they?
Yeah, of course they are. Just baby dinosaurs.
Baby dinosaurs.
No, but it depends what kind of pet somebody has as well.
Yeah, I within reason.
Yeah, but most people usually it's a cat and a dog.
Yeah.
Mostly, isn't it? And
Cat, dog, goldfish.
A lizard, goldfish. Okay. Guinea pig, budgerigar, parrot, that type of stuff.
House rabbit, whatever.
Yeah, hamster.
Interesting though, this blew my mind when I found out. I know a tenant who got told they couldn't have their goldfish in their in their rented property, and I thought, goldfish, really?
Why is that?
There was no justifiable reason for it, but yeah, of all the things to deny a tenant a goldfish as a pet, I mean,
It takes all sorts to make the world go around, Kieran.
It really does. And this next idea, I'm really on board with, is creating a digital private rented portal to bring together all the key information that you need as a landlord, as a tenant, as a council. Yeah, so everything's all in one place, so you know where to look. And it will be really, that sort of thing, when everything's all in one place, will be super useful for disputes, for information, and for just passing things on. I think that's going to be fantastic.
They said all that about making tax digital. I think we missed the deadline at least twice.
At least twice, yeah. Well, it is what it is. Making it illegal to have blanket bans on renting to tenants in receipt of benefits or with children. So no family is discriminated against, while landlords will retain the final say in who they rent to. The aim will be to prevent any discrimination in any way, shape or form. And I think that can only be a good thing. Sadly, I've got another 2 pages of information.
I think we've covered enough.
But I think we've covered a lot there.
Yeah,
if you want more information, go online. The information, all the information that I've just read out, by all means go online.
But it isn't law yet.
None of it's law yet. These are just, for lack of a better term, ideas.
But I think politicians need to take a bit more responsibility, Kieran, and start addressing the real issues.
I agree.
Right? And if they did, then we wouldn't have these problems. And they can fix these through that particular reform.
Through fixing the source cause.
It takes somebody a lot of courage to say, we're going to fix this once and for all.
Yep, and it'll take a lot of work.
A lot of houses after World War II. Let's do it again because we're going to.
Thanks for listening to Wealth Made Simple. You can follow and contact Shaz on the Facebook pages Entrust Property Tax and The Profits Wizard. You can also find Shaz on LinkedIn, YouTube and Instagram. Alternatively, email him at shaz@aa-accountants.co.uk. Build your wealth by mastering money.